Welcome back to Inside Singapore Sports Business. Our show features key opinion leaders from Singapore's sports industry. ISSB is brought to you in collaboration with Sports Singapore and the Toad Board. I'm your host Adele, and fittingly today we are at Cafe Football. We have two great guests with us to talk about the football industry in Singapore and how it compares to the rest of the region. So let's get started. To speak more about the football industry in Singapore, and joining us for a comparative discussion between Singapore and the rest of Southeast Asia is our former defender of the Singapore national team. We have Mr. R. Sasikumar. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Sasi, you have like a list of accomplishments. You were, famous for your 1998 AFF Cup winning goal, and then of course you still appear on TV, on radio as a football pundit and expert, and you now have transited to sports marketing. You are now the CEO of Red Card Global since 2005. You are also the owner of Admiralty FC. How do you manage your time doing so many things?
Yeah, I think good question, very good question. First of all, thanks for having me. I suppose I was one of those guys blessed to turn my passion into a job, and I don't think so. I have a job. I never had a job. I just enjoy doing what I've been always doing. And I'm glad to be here to talk about it today, actually. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you for joining us. We are so excited to hear more from you. We also have Mr. Ivan Codina. You are a former ice hockey player and youth coach at FC Barcelona. You've also actually worked with Sasi at Red Card Global, and you are also at Denso Sport doing football marketing. And currently you are the Managing Director of Asia at LaLiga. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ivan.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
We are. How long have you guys actually known each other? We're really glad that you're already friends. That helps.
Yeah, we've been long-time friends, but I must say that Sasi was my boss at some point, and once a boss, always a boss. So probably Sasi is a big reason why I'm still here in Singapore after 14 years when I first came to Singapore for a 6-month assignment. So we've been long-time friends.
Well, can you tell us a little bit more about your personal backgrounds? We know your professional accolades. Maybe we start with you, Sasi.
Yeah, so I have, like you mentioned earlier, I was a professional footballer. I actually quit quite early at 29, decided to pursue a career in sports marketing. I left Australia and then came back and started Red Card Global. I still remember 2005. And fast forward now, we are a consultancy. Before we used to be turnkey when Ivan was with us. We did all sorts of stuff, really cool stuff over the last 15, 16 years. Now we do a lot of consultancy. We also look at the commercial side and financial side of sports now, which I get really excited about. It's outside my comfort zone, but I'm learning like we all do. I also have my radio show on CNA 938. I talk about sports. In the last 2 years, I've been doing that. And I have two young kids, 8 and 10, who are aspiring to be footballers. So I spend a lot of time running around with them, trying to hopefully live the dream that I did. And hopefully one day they can sit in a show like this and say they never had a job in their life because they enjoy what they're doing.
That's inspiring. Yeah, that's really inspiring. How about you, Ivan? What is your personal and professional?
Well, I was also a professional athlete in a complete different sport than football. I was an ice hockey player back in the days. I had my career basically in Spain, a couple of stints in Canada and France. I quit my career at the age of 32, a bit later than Sasi, and also to pursue a career in the sports industry. I knew from the very beginning that I wanted to continue my life, related to sports, and here's when I came to Singapore in early 2009 to work for the first ever Youth Olympic Games in history. After that, I realized that I wanted to stay longer in Singapore, and Sasi was who gave me the opportunity to work with him in Red Card. after Red Card, I moved to Dentsu, and then the last 5 years I spent my time running the regional office of LaLiga, looking after Southeast Asia, Japan, and Korea.
How does that transition feel like to be, a competitive player in one sport and then now managing director of another sport?
Well, to me, I must say that I'm nuts about sports. I like every single sport. Like I said, I was really, driven that I wanted to continue my journey in the sports industry. I would say that it was a natural, a transition because I prepared for it, and I was studying. I did my studies in sports management, and then I always say that I'm one lucky, person that is working. I spend a lot of hours, in my job, but I do what I really like for a living. So that is very important. So I would say that it was quite a natural transition for me, at least.
Right. And when you were working together, what were some of the most memorable, maybe, events that you were involved?
This one, I have no doubt, because still up until today is one of the best projects I ever been involved. It was the Lion City Cup. I think the Lion City. Oh, sorry. Let me call it the Canon Lion City Cup. Because I know the folks from Canon did a big effort as well, to be part of it, and it was a wonderful project where we were able to work with the youth development or the youth teams of Singapore. Some of these players now playing already at the highest level here in Singapore, and we were able to see some of the top European stars now in playing in the top leagues in Europe. So I would say that was the highlight of my time, working with Sasi at Red Card.
What about you, Sarsi? Are there any other events that was specifically memorable for you?
Yeah, I mean, Ivan's spot on with picking up Lion City Cup, because I think as an agency that also put us on the map, because we took a tournament that was underwater for 3 years and then made it a global event. And at some point we were rated the top 5 youth tournaments in the world. And credit must go to the likes of Ivan and the team that worked behind the scenes tirelessly. I mean, while I was the face, but these guys were the real machine behind the agency. We've done a lot of cool stuff over the years, last 15, 16 years. We've done really from youth development to all sorts of different events. We even brought the F1 powerboat to the Marina Bay. We did the World Cup of table tennis. And personally, I was involved in one of the bigger deals in sports, which was privatizing the Malaysian Super League, which resulted in a $450 million deal for the league over 15 years. So I was the lead consultant for that. So I've seen the small and the large over the last, I would say, 17 years in my role. But I always felt that there was not a project that's small or big. Everything has to be given the same priority and the same enthusiasm. But we've been lucky, and I've personally been very blessed that not just from football. Football took me around the world, and my job also took me around the world. In fact, in September, where Ivan was there, I was in Spain. So I spent 5 weeks in Spain, and we caught up at the World Football Summit. So, like I keep saying, I'm blessed. I'm really blessed that I live for the job that I do.
Wow, that's really amazing, and it sounds like such a tight-knit community of industry players as well.
Yeah.
It is. In the end, the industry is way more than people tend to think, and not just here in Asia, but as a whole. And when we have the opportunity to even travel to Spain for World Football Summit and other conferences, or you get to work in the industry, you end up realizing that the industry is quite small. So it's a big part of it is also the camaraderie that you are able to develop, with all the different people that you get to meet along the years.
I have a lot of questions for you guys, but since we're a business show, let's start with let's get into the meat and potatoes a little bit. Let's talk about some numbers to satisfy that component. From a commercial perspective, how big would you say is the football industry in Singapore? Media value or just general?
Yeah. So I think no real study has been done about what's the actual numbers behind it. But I've got some examples to go by. Years ago, when Singtel just broke into the scene, where the cable, when they got into the whole IPTV game, it was no secret that they paid $300 million for the EPL rights for 3 years. So you think about it, and now it was, I think, 300 million a year or something like that, something along that line, if my memory serves me right. So you can see that there's a lot of appetite for someone like Singtel to pay that kind of money. And people always say that there's no money in football. I famously, I think it was in 2017 or 18, I went on national papers and said that the football industry is worth $1 billion. And people actually laughed at me, said, come on, $1 billion? I think it's only laughable when you don't have the imagination to think that it's worth that much. So in my head, I feel that it's still a undiscovered diamond. It's still in the raw, but there's so much opportunities to actually build on it. The very fact that we have about maybe close to 300,000 weekend warriors, so to speak, people who play amateur football, that's an industry by itself. Then you got the Singapore Premier League, which is Singapore's only professional league here. And then you got the TV rights that are, being banded around, right? So I think that there is an industry, that's a big industry around sports here. Unfortunately, I think it's not the primary mover of Singapore's GDP here. So that now falls at the bottom of the ranking, so to speak, right? But still, I mean, someone like me, I've made a living out of running a sports agency here. So that shows that there is a vibrant business, and if you can find pockets of opportunities, and you can make a good living, like I did. And if on the other end of the spectrum is guys like Ivan who now lead international organizations, the very fact that they actually are positioned here to then take advantage of Singapore and the infrastructure that Singapore holds and the region as well, which I'm sure we'll be talking about in a bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's always, for me, I like to always put in the context of the region as well, because with the different roles that I had along the years since I moved to Singapore, I get to see, the different, countries in the region when it comes to football. And I think Sasi was very right. In the end, we have here a big appetite, for some of the biggest rights holders in the industry, to have presence in here. Of course, is a great, spot, Singapore as a hub, to look at the region. But it's not just that the reason why we have the likes of beIN Sports. We have some of the top European clubs, having the offices here, PSG. We have a Chelsea, Arsenal, and then LaLiga. And not only that, we have also some of the biggest brands in sports that they have present here in Singapore. So there is all the different necessary means to look at the football industry as a big industry that it should be seen as, but still probably there is a little bit more of alignment or connecting the dots like Steve Jobs used to say.
But so in both of your experiences, have you seen any changes, or do you think it's grown exponentially within the last couple of decades?
Definitely not grown exponentially, unfortunately.
Not even with digitization.
I think it's different. Obviously it has move along the way with the new trends and the new environments that we have in our everyday life, but that doesn't translate, unfortunately, to growing exponentially. I think it's still a long way to go. In my personal opinion, I think there is signs of new initiatives that are quite positive, and I think that we will be touching on it further down the interview. But I think there is still a huge a gap to try to work on and see the real potential of Singapore showing.
Would you both be able to comment about how the industry is in Singapore, or the value of the football industry in Singapore compared to, I guess, the region, South Asia?
Yeah, maybe I can chime in on this, right? So when we started in 2005, back in 2005 seems like a long time ago, we had to educate a lot of the clients on sports marketing, especially when it came to football marketing and sports marketing. We had to educate a lot of clients. Even the big blue chip clients here in Singapore, you look at the telcos and all of them, they didn't understand what sports marketing as a vertical was. And if Singapore, which is a bit more advanced than most of the ASEAN regions, didn't understand it, then you can imagine the challenge we had in the region as well, especially when you go into developing markets, right? So we had to do and spend a lot of time educating them But we knew that was a huge appetite, especially when you went into somewhere like Indonesia. 260 million people, football is not a sport, it's a religion. When the team in Jakarta plays against the team in Bandung, people die, right? So it means a lot to them. Obviously, the trick and the science and art behind that was to extract that passion and turn that into dollars. And at that time, that was not a norm. People just did it because they found that there was eyeballs there, they went there, but there was no proper strategy behind it. So to answer your question with how big it compares, Singapore can't compare to the likes of Malaysia even, because we're just a small population. Though football is still our number one sport, because of the sheer size of Singapore's marketplace, so you don't see the same numbers in Indonesia by pure size. But that's not to say that because maybe per capita we have a higher spending power, but they have volume. They have scale on that. So I would say that over the years, what we've seen is that it was great to be as an agency, great to be based in Singapore, use the Singapore brand, use our skill sets and what we've learned from organizational perspective and all of that systems, but then go into markets like Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and see how we can bring value to those ecosystems. And that's where a business was born for us, basically. So I think when you compare size, you can't even compare size. It's not comparing apples to apples. But I think Singapore had other things that we could offer. Yeah, maybe I think Ivan will be in a better position to answer because he represents a global brand being based here, and I think their business is regional. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a matter of identifying what are the competitive advantage that Singapore has versus some of the other markets. End of the day, number one thing is that in terms of when it comes to talent, the pool of talent in these markets in a country like Indonesia is massive. But then in Singapore, you also have advantage. You have the means, to invest, in the hardware that we were discussing before, to develop the right structure, and to make sure that it's even easier to implement in a smaller population country like Singapore than it could be in the likes of Indonesia, Malaysia, or Vietnam, to say some of the countries. So I think that the key, the key option or the key fact that needs to be the strategy of Singapore is to focus on maximizing, these opportunities that they have, to develop the right competitive advantage versus, some of the countries in the region. Then is when Singapore has a chance to grow exponentially.
So Ivan, you take care of Southeast Asia, Japan, Australia. What would you say are some of in our region, the biggest markets?
Well, in the end, I think that nowadays, I'm pretty sure to say that Thailand is leading the way. Thailand has done, things very well in not just on the field of play and in terms of getting the results, but also to trying to invest in the infrastructure that is needed to develop the football industry. They are investing a lot in grassroots. They are, investing in preparing or developing the future leaders that are gonna lead the football industry in Thailand, which I think is something that is crucial, for any of the different FAs and football countries in the region. And then if you look at the league, the Thai league is the only league in the region that has been able to develop a structure of 3 different divisions, and so they have pretty much everything. I would say in the right, if you compare especially with the rest of the region, in the right place, to keep leading the way in the region at least for the next few years.
So I have a 2-part question for both of you. How would you say Singapore compares in terms of the revenue for sponsorships and also for broadcasting?
Very good question. I think when it comes to, let's start with sponsorship. The reality of sponsorships here is because the market is small, the market size is small. So if you take any brand, even if they are a regional headquarters situated here, their budget is according to the size of the population or the market size, right? So you don't see too many $1 million, I would say, sponsorship deals that are floating around. And that becomes a problem for sports promoters and people who are seeking sponsorship. So every now and then you hear $1 million or a multi-million-dollar deal signed. I'll give you an example. When it's a global stage like Formula One, Singtel before had to pledge $10 million. Then Singapore Airlines took over, and then they pledged 10 million. But that is such a global event, right? So it's all relative to what the asset is, what the event is, and stuff like that. So from that perspective, Singapore is considered one of the smallest markets, I can say, in Southeast Asia. And when it comes to broadcasting, it's almost the same, except for one, which is what we call the top-end content, which is the English Premier League. And I like to say that LaLiga sits in the same rights bracket as well, but we all know that there's a distance between the English Premier League and the rest of the leagues, not just LaLiga. But then that seems to have a lot of appetite here. But that's also slowly changing. The likes of Singtel and all are starting to realize that they don't have to pay so much because there's no competition. If you look at from a broadcaster perspective, now that ESPN Star Sports is Fox, rather, I'm still living in the past. Fox is non-existent now. You look at StarHub that doesn't really buy any more rights. MediaCorp, the free-to-air, can't afford those sort of rights. That really leaves you with one, right? And when there's no competition in the market, unless there's another new entrant, which a lot of people are trying to do, these OTT platforms, direct to consumer, and they can actually live alongside, I would say, cable operators. So the rights, we only will see it coming downwards because Singapore as a broadcast marketplace is no more as competitive as what it used to be. That's my take on sponsorship and I would say broadcast rights in Singapore.
How does Singapore's sponsorship revenue compare to the region?
Well, I mean, in the end, it's down to what we were saying before, is the size of the market. No? Unfortunately, it's where it is. Singapore has the size that it is. So obviously, in some of the other markets, the pool or the populations are way bigger. And also in those markets where the leagues are, let's say, more developed, then there's more opportunities when it comes to attract, potential regional partners or brands that are interested in investing in the competition. So unfortunately, right now, Singapore in that sense is in disadvantage with most of the other leagues in the region. That being said, I still believe that there is opportunities there if the league goes. And now there's been some changes in the last couple of seasons, and there's some opportunities to keep developing the SPL. I think that there could be opportunities to still attract decent, amount of sponsors, always with a certain limitation for the reasons that Sasi has mentioned. But right now, the truth is that they are in clear disadvantage, or the opportunities are lessened.
What about on the broadcast level? Sasi, you mentioned that because of the reduced competition for content, that kind of great content here, is that a global? I would have thought that with the rise of OTT platforms, the competition is higher. So this is a new thing. Well,
from the stance of, and this with my current employer, LaLiga, we actually were facing, or we are currently facing a similar case in Spain. We have historically Telefónica and Movistar. They've been always, supporting LaLiga, and it was a time that because they have a lot of power and means, they becoming almost the only player that go into the tender. So from our end, what we did is to try to generate more competition. How you do that? So you try to, end of the day, try to come up with new ways on how to distribute our content and our rights. So there is to me a clear leader in the sports sector that does these things very well, and is the NBA. So NBA has what they call the League Pass, and that helps to take to split the content and different options for the consumers. And that is not just an option for linear TV, but also for OTT platforms. And you can play around, and in end of the day, bottom line is that you are engaging more potential players to come into the picture, get a little bit more of competition, and then eventually you get a better result or more opportunities to get a bigger offers for your rights. So I think that could be something that at some point, I'm not saying that Singapore is yet there, but they could be looking at.
I think one of the up and coming ways to distribute content is also via blockchain NFTs, and LaLiga has already such a fast mover exploring into that space. Do you see that as in the future a very big part of the revenue NFT market?
Well, it's not in the future. It's already happening. It's already
a
a
very
reality.
big part of revenue.
And I think it's just gonna get bigger. No, end of the day, I would like to say is LaLiga. It's not just LaLiga. If you look at the biggest rights holder in the industry, I would say that pretty much all of them have already engaged with different NFTs companies. And I think it's just going to get bigger and bigger, and there's definitely a big opportunity for everyone who hasn't already been engaged, but because there is a big, companies are willing to invest a lot, and I think it's very easy to find, certain assets and content, that these companies are interested in investing on. So that definitely is a reality. It's not the future, it's happening already.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that space unfold as well. But I hear both of you, and the size of Singapore is something that is always been a limitation that we have had to live with and then figure out how to make the best of and pivot from. But that said, I would like to pick both your minds about the very good news we have seen recently regarding the privatization of one of our clubs. So I think the Lion City Sailors, right? They had like this $1 million deal that was announced. What were your thoughts? Or did you already know of it brewing long ago?
I think because I used to play for the club, it was called Home United before. That was my club, and then Shopee and the C Group bought it and turned it into Lion City Sailors. So it's a club that has a lot of history, won a lot of titles. As part of the privatization, they changed their name, right? So I thought that it was a big visionary, like someone like Forrest Lee, who saw that possibilities with football, which comes back to my point when in 2017 or 18, I said it's $1 billion industry. He's obviously very successful. He's the richest man in Singapore. Obviously, he's seen a vision to grow a club using football as a platform to obviously not just grow his business, also grow his social status in the sense, and maybe springboard that into becoming a global domination. I just read a week ago, so by 2030, they're going to be $1 trillion company, right? They're going to be $1 trillion company. What the $1 trillion companies do, they go on an acquisition spree, right? And they already got a vehicle in Lion City Sailors, and I don't see them stopping here. They're going to go into different markets, maybe LaLiga, even the English Premier League. They're going to go and buy more clubs. And coming back to your point of them spending millions of dollars on players, I think this is just the start. They're going to go and do a lot more. It's exactly what football needed here for a long time. We have never seen this. At best, years ago, we brought Jermaine Pennant as part of our business to Tampines Rovers, and that was a bit of a bust. We thought at that time that Tampines Rovers and the entire league should have just taken off from there, maybe attract more players. There was no momentum. But the Lion City Sailors are clearly leaders in the space. They come from a very sound business background. They're tech guys. They see things even before people see it, so which is good. I'm excited about how they're going to go and evolve their business as a club. And hopefully, three others say that, hey, they're onto something here. We want a piece of the action. I think that's the only way forward.
Yeah. I think it's definitely great news for Singapore. I mean, nobody can doubt about that. But that also needs to come with additional support. End of the day, if you just get one of the clubs, leading the way in this particular way, is not enough. You need, the league themselves, to also, keep up, with the expectations and to invest in the further development of the league and be able to support, the likes of Lion City Sailors, and only then they're going to be able to attract more eyes and hopefully, other big companies or private investors, to invest in some of the other clubs. But definitely is great news, but it needs to be in a bit more, for the league, to fully benefit from this move.
But earlier we talked about how, the marketing budgets in Singapore are fixed because it's allocated according to the size of our market. So even with this privatization, even with this $1 million deals being signed, do you think that sponsorship value would go up?
I think to what you just said, yes and no. It's set, but at the same time, if let's say we have a club like Lion City Sailors that is able to attract world-class talent or recognizable talent, that sells. Even then is when they're gonna be also able to attract other investors, other brands to invest in the club and the league. So that's why what we need here is to a little bit like a domino effect. So it's great to have the Lion City Sailors, but as I said, there's a need to at least attract 2 more clubs, the league themselves and the football industry as a whole in Singapore to keep developing, because as it stands right now is great, but also at the same time it could be that at some point they are far ahead from the rest of the teams in the competition. Right now, this season I think it was a great story. With the title decided in the last match day with Albirex. But if they keep investing and just the Lion City Sailors developing and the rest of the teams and the league cannot follow, then at some point it's going to be just a little bit with the different, it's complete different story, but you have JDT in Malaysia, nobody can compete with them, and you also don't want that, right? You in the end, you expect to have a competition that is a little bit more even, and you have more attractiveness, with the final results, but that's from my point of view.
Right. Yeah. Earlier, Sasi, you mentioned that you were involved with the Malaysian team being privatized. Do you see any areas that we can compare with what happened here?
I think it's not about whether we should or shouldn't. I think in the future it's going to happen. It has to happen, right? The pure reason because of that is that to create a sustainable model in football, it has to be privatized. Right now, the way that the football is working here is that a lot of them are non-profit organizations, and they are always working in a benefactor model, meaning to say that the chairman comes with the money and he picks up the whatever difference. In long term, no matter how much money you have, you don't want to lose money, right? So the model has to change to see how they can make it sustainable. What do we mean by that? It's easy to actually say let's privatize, but what is the nuts and bolts of privatization? Coming back to your point earlier, the market is small. So we must start to think about how can we now create an opportunity for businesses to come and be participating in a football club, right? There are certain clubs in LaLiga do it really well. One being Cartagena, right? They have something called the business club, where they actually reach out to local businesses. Because while they might not have the $1 million budget, they might have anywhere between $3,000 to $5,000 or $3,000 to $10,000. But you pull them together as a group. And then as a football club, then you kind of, at the end of the day, every business, what do they want? They want leads, they want customers. That's all they want. They want money, right? They want sales. So because the football club has to be the platform for people to come together, eyeballs, people, and because there's some sort of tribal following of the club, then you can now, the downstream of this is to allow these businesses that support the platform to monetize it. So I think we need to, I'll give you an example. When I was in Australia, I used to play for a club called Oakley Cannons in the Victoria League. And what they did was they were a Greek club. Every weekend, we would play. The Greeks would come, that's their club. They would spend and eat and drink at the club. And that's how the club sustained itself. It's the community that comes together to sustain the club. So I think we should take these models that are around in the world and say, okay, now we can't go for the $1 million one, but can we truly be, a Tampines Rovers, can it truly be a community club? Can we be in the heart of the club? That's another point that I want to bring. A lot of the football clubs here in Singapore, they would spend $1 million or $10,000 or $15,000 on a player. In the last 20 years, none of these SPL clubs had one commercial director that you pay $10,000 or $15,000, who is actually the lifeline of the club. So they have actually paid attention to the wrong time. It's not that football doesn't work here. You need to understand that there's something called pipeline of money, cash flows, and who's the person that... So the chairman cannot be tasked to do that. They are business people. They haven't got time to go and knock on the door. Ivan will tell you, this is what we do for a living. We knock on doors every day. And of course, you get more no's than yes. But when the yes comes, it's money, right? So I think the modus operandi of a lot of football clubs is actually not as what it's supposed to be. There are some good good practices, so to speak, and that's something that's adaptable to Singapore. So I would say if you go to a local supermarket or a big food chain or whatever, they can afford the $3,000 a month. But if you've got hundreds of that, that's $300,000. For a football club, that's a lot of money. So I think we really need to start thinking about those solutions. We really need to start putting those plans in place. Then I think we can have a vibrant, and then maybe slowly start challenging the likes of the Lion City Sailors who have huge budgets.
Which, by the way, I think that they did a great job, like Lion City Sailors, not just in putting the right squad, to be competitive and to win the title, but actually, back to what Sasi was saying, you need a certain structure in the clubs, right? And in the end, a lot of these, revenues that they can generate needs to go back, to the structure of the club. And this is actually something that we are working very hard in Spain, because even if it's a very developed league, and one of the top European leagues, you still have the lack of infrastructure within the club in terms of having the right professionals, to take care of certain part of the business. Because end of the day, let's not forget you are aiming to have a business, and in the end, if you don't have the infrastructure, doesn't matter. End of the day, that on the pitch, sometimes the ball goes in and sometimes the ball doesn't go in. But if you have the structure, you can sustain the business, wait for the time that the ball keeps going in, but there needs to be a certain structure, and a lot of the times it's difficult to take that decision to see where do I put my money. I put the money on the players, or I put the money to make sure that I develop the right structure for the club. Because if you go out and try to attract all these, potential partners, to help grow the business, but if you cannot take care of the investment or the revenues that you generate, so this is something that is crucial.
What are some of these structures of the club that you think?
Yeah, you need. End of the day, there is multiple areas that need to be taken care in a club on a regular basis. No, you have the digital communications, marketing, match day operations, etc. All this needs to be run professionally if you want to make sure that at the end of the day you can deliver what is expected from the different partners that you work with, and all of it, is interconnected. And all of it, will help, to increase, not just the attendees to the stadium to watch the games, but also in the end to increase the value of the rights that you want to sell out, whether it's TV rights, whether it's the sponsorship rights, whether it's anything related to business. So if you don't have the right structure, it's almost impossible, because then you're just, gambling. Sometimes it will work, sometimes it won't work, but you need to invest in the right structure. That's fundamental for the business.
Now this kind of begs the question, is the football culture in Singapore, of course, I love football, don't get me wrong, and football is so easy to love. We all do. We actually, we're all on the same page here, preaching to the choir here, but outside of this room, is the football culture strong enough to attract higher level of investment in Singapore?
So this needs to start. Let's take a step back and think about the football ecosystem. If you take away the SPL clubs, right, and in fact, you take away Albirex and the Young Lions, you only have 6 clubs, local clubs. Then you look one division below, semi-professional. Another rank below is, so I'm a part owner of Admiralty FC. We used to play in the 2nd division. Now on the last day of the season, 2 years ago, we got relegated. But our idea was not to build a $1 million club where we make money out of it. The reason why we bought into the club is to make a community club. We wanted to take Admiralty and put it into the heart of East Coast, which was Kembangan. We wanted to make sure that the people around there, doesn't matter we are playing in the SPL or what, it's the people's club where the kids can come, they can go on the bouncing castle, people can come have a drink, have a burger or a hot dog, and football is by the way kind of thing. But we are a conduit to bring the community together. Actually, that's how football started, right? Somehow along the way, we forgot the idea that this is a community event, and we saw that during the pandemic, they played football with no fans. That's not football, right? Unfortunately, for a long time, SPL, we had less than 300 people at the stadium. So somewhere along the line, we have actually missed out the idea that this is a community event, that we need to be part of the community. So for football to work, when you talk about the culture, we don't have enough football clubs here in Singapore to build that football culture. Just the other day, I saw an image in Spain when they put the map of Spain and the football clubs. and the image was filled with football clubs. 5 weeks ago, I was there and I was looking at the structure. There's so many teams. I mean, you look at just in the regional leagues, there are 100 teams in the regional league. So that's where the culture comes. So if I'm part of this town, that's my local. But I still can support the biggest team in the top league. But I have a hometown team that I feel affiliated to. I buy their shirts. I go to the game whenever I can. I go there and spend money, right? So that's how the economy works. We need to get back down to the roots to say, back in those days, when I was young, there were a lot of clubs. I lived in Yishun. Up north, there were so many clubs. Today, even the top league in the Singapore Premier League, there's no club from the north, which is unthinkable because some of the top footballers in Singapore came from the north, right? So talking about the culture is that along the way, it eroded. Football culture eroded because there was a lack of clubs.
Would you say that back in the day when you were playing, was that different?
Big difference. Big difference because I had a structure. I could play for an amateur team and then I'm good. Then I get scouted and I keep going up the ladder. Today, you don't have teams to play. Like if I was to go and play somewhere, where would I go? If I'm a kid up north, where would I go and play? I just don't have a club. And then they end up going to Active SG Academy and going up there. But that's not club culture. Club culture, club football culture is completely different. It's my town, my city. I feel affiliated. I'll go and scream and shout in the weekend. A bit like what I said in Australia, where I was playing. The Greeks got together to support their club. That was their club. Not to mention that they were Manchester United fans or A-League fans, but that was their club. So the football culture is sorely missing. We need to go back to the grassroots. We need to empower grassroots clubs to come up. You and me and everybody should be opening up boys and girls club or football clubs, and then we grow from there. You know, that's how communities are born. In fact, that's how humanity was born, right? A tribe came together and they built small cities, towns, and then it became countries. So football club is no different.
Right. So what I'm hearing, Sasi, is that size. Sure, as much as we're small, there are actually many opportunities. Ivan, do you agree? Now you oversee a much bigger region. So what do you think about our small size here in Singapore?
I think that actually, for Singapore, it could be an advantage, because in the end, with the given size of Singapore, you are able to organize yourself much better and easier than one of these big nations that that are neighboring Singapore. If actually is what Singapore does in many other areas, in the success of the country. So I think that yes, it's important, like at the size, but at the same time, it represents a big opportunity for Singapore to also identify what are the best, like a way to attract investment and to organize themselves, and Singapore is capable of that, so they have the means, and I think, in my opinion, it's way easier for Singapore to come up with the right plan and strategy than a country like Indonesia that yes has a massive pool with a population of almost 300 million, but it's even to organize Jakarta. I think I'm not entirely sure how this can happen at some point.
So then, given everything that we have discussed today, where do you see the future of football in Singapore?
I think that it's some interesting moves that are happening in Singapore. I think we are all aware of the UTR project. You have the Singapore Football Federation. You have the ministry. You have a Sports SG all come together. That is a great initiative, and I think that is a great start. So it's in the end very important to see that everybody needs to come together on this. It's no longer a matter of the federation or the league or a Sports SG to lead the way. Everybody needs to contribute. It needs to be yes, there is an objective to qualify for the World Cup at some point, but that should be the end result, right? In the end, you need to go back to the basics. Need to make sure that the emphasis is on the grassroots and to make sure that you build the right foundations for the project. So I really think that there is an opportunity now to see some results in the upcoming years, but it needs to start with this unification of efforts, with everybody together looking in the right direction.
Right, true. I mean, everybody talks about the great infrastructure that we have here. And Sarsi, earlier you said, we need more community clubs. What else do you think needs to happen in Singapore in order to, I guess, on a business level, attract more sponsors, but then also on a grassroots level, get more people involved?
First of all, I think to galvanize society, you need to be inspiring, right? You need inspiring people to come forward and say that, hey, we are embarking on this, right? So I don't want to be sounding too theoretical or philosophical. If you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? First, people want food and comfort. Then once they get past that, they want other things, right? So I think Singapore has now moved away from that, of survival, to now let's look at other things that will make the society wholesome, which also means that we want sporting heroes. In the past, when Joseph Schooling won the Olympic gold, you brought the whole country together, like just one hero. I think football sorely misses that. Football sorely misses the idea of a guy that makes it at the top and then drags everybody across, or a team that makes it at the top and drags everybody across. I can speak from experience when in '98, when we won the Tiger Cup back then that was the team that galvanized the nation, and then we started to drag people across. And then there was a belief, because there was a goal of 2010, qualifying for the World Cup. I was a beneficiary of that. At the back of that, the S-League was born, and the S-League was very vibrant, if you remember. For the first 4 or 5 years, it was the best league in Asia, some would argue. But unfortunately, again, we lost the traction. And with this Unleash the Raw project, World Goal 2034, I hope that the vigor comes back. But it is not only to be paid attention to the infrastructure. We have all the hardware in the world. We need the software. When I talk about software, it's about the people, right? We need people skills. Singapore has only one thing, which is human resource. We don't have minerals. We don't have anything that's natural. We only have human beings. So I think where we should really be paying attention is the next generation of leaders in sports, which has not been addressed. You got different pillars we talk about. We talk about football excellence. We talk about grassroots and all of that. All of that can only be supported if you have the software of people pushing those things forward. When you have people who are maybe later stage of their lives making decisions and pushing projects forward, where's the next generation of people? You can have enough gray hair guys, but you need the younger 20-year-olds, the 30-year-olds to give the initial of projects moving forward. So I like to see that. I like to see us empower people to be in different positions, upskilling, and with the pandemic, a lot of people are now looking at shifting into different careers, right? So there are a lot of football fans who might say that, actually, you know what, I've been in the banking world or whatever, manufacturing world. Maybe it's time for me to get into the sporting world. But then where's the pathway? We might actually be able to find some really talented people to come into sports, especially in football, and take that forward. So I think the powers that be, my request is to look at the software side of things, look at people who come with different ideas, not because we disagree that we are all against, right? Sometimes the best ideas come with debate, with disagreements, with questioning, challenging, right? So I'd like to see that being a bit more in our society, so that not just in football, I think generally we can actually move forward.
And so both of you have mentioned Unleash the Raw. What do you think about the 2034 the project to get us qualified for the World Cup?
Well, like I said, that should be a consequence of starting the project now. That we're investing in the right means, and like Sasi said, just to make sure that the right software is in place, infrastructure and hardware. Looks like it's not an issue for Singapore, but is important to make sure that in the end, the right foundations of the project are developed now, and then you'll see the results in 2034 with the new structures that the FIFA is putting in place, and I think that there's going to be an official bid coming up from the region for the 2034. I think that Singapore might stand a chance, but
so you think it's a realistic goal?
Well, and it is if. Back to the point, if the right, software and the right foundations to the project are addressed accordingly right now, I think is a crucial moment for the future of Singapore football. I think that the good intentions are there, but it's not just enough. It's not enough. The good intention is crucial to make sure that the right decisions and the right software and the right matters are properly addressed. So only then is going to be an opportunity for Singapore to eventually qualify for a World Cup. Why not?
Maybe I want to take a different spin on this, right? Because in Singapore, we are too practical of thinking about if we get to the goal, if we get to the World Cup in 2034, then we deem that as a success. I like to think about it in a different way. I think we need to enjoy the process of getting there. In the process of getting there, we change mindsets, we change culture, we change the way we think, our beliefs about not just football, about sports. So if we pay too much attention to the actual outcome, then everything else is going to be a failure. Because if we change, let's say, for example, we have 300 football clubs, we have some of the top players playing in Europe, or the entire industry now suddenly becomes vibrant, yet we don't qualify for the 2034 World Cup. Is it a failure? Actually, it's not. We have actually progressed, right? So I think the people, the fans, the public shouldn't pay too much attention, because I hear about this all the time with the 2010. Oh, we didn't qualify for the 2010, but we had a vibrant league. People are paying attention to the wrong things, right? So I think because we're such a practical society where we say success is measured by this, actually there are a lot of other good things that come along with that we don't pay attention or grateful for, right? I think really we should, I'm not the one to decide these things, but I would say I would really like to see that the process becomes so good that we benefit in other ways. And if we qualify for the 2034 World Cup, I'll be gladly in my wheelchair going to the finals to watch it. But we shouldn't be, that's not the actual end game. That is a good goal, but that shouldn't be the end game.
I think this is so important to hear on a business show from business leaders, that let's also focus on the process of getting there. Thank you so much for adding that, because I also feel that earlier you've mentioned about the grassroots movement, the community. I think that the fan support is very important as well. We don't just want to love our players when they're winning. We love them anyway, right? So then, last question for both of you. Would you say that there are any Southeast Asian markets or models that Singapore could try to aspire to look towards as a role model on our journey there?
Well, there is definitely, there is like I said before, Thailand seems to be leading the way right now. I think Vietnam is also starting to do things, quite interesting. That being said, every country, every football project in the region have their own challenges. But probably, perhaps I would highlight that Thailand is one of the models that Singapore should be trying to get some bits and pieces from there. But in the end, Singapore has everything also to build their own identity and to make sure that they have their own successful projects. So I'm very confident, and I wanna think that Singapore is gonna be able to also try to be on top of the region, sooner than later.
How about yourself, Sasi?
Excellent point he brought up. I think it's spot on the fact that we need to build our own identity. We can take best practices from around the world, but it's about time that we had our own identity. Not to say that, let's do what Japan is doing or China is doing. The nuances are completely different. Singapore is a very unique place. The dynamics of Singapore is completely different. So that's why I feel that we should build our own culture, own identity, the Singapore way. In many ways, we eat rojak because it's mixed and we like it, right? We can't say whether roti prata is what is roti prata, right? So it means a lot. Chicken rice means a lot of things for us. Uniquely Singapore. I think that's the motto, right? So I would say that let's build our own culture that allows us to thrive the way that the country needs to thrive, and let sports be part of our lives. I think that's important. I really feel that's important, and if we can do that, I think there's no reason that we can't be successful, because we've proven that we are successful in many other aspects. And I really wish in my lifetime that we see that sports become successful. We already had one taste with Joe Schooling. Hopefully, more to come along the way.
I really enjoyed this conversation with both of you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
So much for having me.
Pleasure.
We unpacked so much today with Sasi and Ivan about the football industry in Singapore. We hope you have enjoyed today's episode of ISSB. Big thank you to you guys for tuning in, and join us again next time.